At 8:45 a.m. on January 20, 1953, President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower sat stone-faced in the back of a gleaming black limousine parked outside the White House north portico, refusing point-blank to set foot inside the building where outgoing President Harry S. Truman waited. The temperature was a chilly 49 degrees. The sky hung heavy and overcast. Inside the White House, the sitting president stood at the window, staring at the motionless car. Eisenhower had made his decision crystal clear: he would not enter as a guest, would not drink coffee with the Trumans, would not follow the sacred tradition. He would sit in that limousine and force Truman to come to him. This was no scheduling mix-up. This was no innocent misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, humiliating insult delivered on what should have been the most dignified moment in American democracy, the peaceful transfer of power from one president to another. The man in that limousine was Dwight Eisenhower, 62 years old, Supreme Allied Commander of World War II, architect of D-Day, liberator of millions, the most beloved military hero in America since Ulysses S. Grant. He had accepted Nazi Germany's surrender, commanded millions across 2 continents, and just crushed the 1952 election with 55% of the popular vote and a staggering 442 electoral votes. Yet on this cold January morning he refused to walk 20 feet to greet the man who had once offered him the presidency on a silver platter. The man inside the White House was Harry S. Truman, 68 years old, former farmer, failed haberdasher, county judge, senator, vice president, and the president who dropped the atomic bombs, stared down Stalin, launched the Marshall Plan, desegregated the military, fired MacArthur, and held the free world together through the darkest early years of the Cold War. 7 years earlier he had privately offered to step aside and run as Eisenhower's vice president on the Democratic ticket. Eisenhower turned him down, repeatedly, claiming he was a soldier, not a politician. Then in 1952 he ran anyway. As a Republican, against Truman's party, against Truman's legacy, against everything Truman had built. And now, on this historic inauguration morning, Eisenhower forced the sitting president to walk to the curb like a servant answering a bell. CBS correspondent Eric Sevareid watched it unfold and later summed it up in 3 unforgettable words: it was shocking. White House Chief Usher J.B. West whispered, "I was glad I wasn't in that car." The once close relationship between these 2 American giants had not always been this toxic. Once they were allies. Once Truman called Eisenhower the greatest military mind of the age. Once Eisenhower wrote Truman letters of genuine respect and gratitude. But something had snapped, something had broken beyond repair, and on this frigid January morning the explosive Truman-Eisenhower feud became visible to the entire nation. The Truman-Eisenhower feud did not erupt overnight. It built slowly over years of choices, refusals, and betrayals that turned mutual admiration into something close to hatred. The first crack appeared in July 1945 on a German Autobahn outside Potsdam. Freshly sworn in after FDR's death, President Truman told General Eisenhower, "General, there is nothing you may want that I won't try to help you get, that includes the presidency in 1948. Truman was dead serious. He felt unprepared for the atomic secret, the two-front war, and global leadership. Eisenhower embodied competence, victory, and moral authority. Ike politely refused. He was a soldier, not a politician. Truman respected the answer and spent the next 6 years proving it. He appointed Eisenhower Army Chief of Staff in November 1945, awarded him the Distinguished Service Medal 3 separate times, 1945, 1948, 1952, and in 1951 made him the first Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. They exchanged warm letters and cooperated smoothly. Then on July 25, 1947, Truman wrote in his private diary that he had again offered the presidency to Eisenhower, this time promising to run as vice president himself if MacArthur sought the Republican nomination. Ike and I could be elected. And my family would be happy outside this great white jail known as the White House. Eisenhower refused again. Secretary of the Army Kenneth Royal carried one final Democratic offer later that year. Still no. In February 1948 the two men stood smiling together at the White House as Truman pinned a fourth DSM on Eisenhower's chest. Newspapers hailed them as partners securing America's future. That same year Truman pulled off the greatest upset in presidential history, defeating Dewey without Eisenhower's help. Yet the repeated refusals planted a seed of doubt in Truman's mind. If Ike truly wanted no part of politics, why did every no leave the door cracked open? The answer detonated in 1952 when Eisenhower announced he would seek the Republican nomination, running directly against Truman's party and legacy. Truman felt personally betrayed. But policy differences alone did not destroy the relationship. What shattered it beyond repair was Eisenhower's refusal to defend George Catlett Marshall during the vicious 1952 campaign. George Marshall, born 1880, VMI graduate, World War II Army Chief of Staff, Organizer of Victory, Architect of the Marshall Plan, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, 1953 Nobel Peace Prize winner, was the man who made Eisenhower's legendary career. In 1941 Marshall plucked an obscure lieutenant colonel named Eisenhower, leapfrogged him over hundreds of senior officers, and handed him command of D-Day. Eisenhower owed Marshall everything. Yet in 1951 to 1952 Senator Joseph McCarthy and his allies launched monstrous, baseless attacks, accusing Marshall of being part of a conspiracy so immense and an infamy so black that it aided communist conquest of China and undermined America worldwide. The charges were grotesque lies, but politically explosive. Truman called Marshall the greatest living American and expected Eisenhower to defend his mentor. Instead, on October 3, 1952, in Milwaukee, McCarthy's home state, Eisenhower deleted a prepared paragraph praising Marshall's patriotism, took the stage beside McCarthy, praised his anti-communist crusades, and allowed photographers to capture the infamous triumphant handshake. Days earlier in Indianapolis, Eisenhower had embraced Senator William Jenner, who called Marshall a living lie and frontman for traitors. Truman exploded in fury, calling Eisenhower a coward who stooped so low for votes. The 1952 campaign became viciously personal. But the George Marshall betrayal was the wound that never healed. Eisenhower won in a landslide, 442 electoral votes to Adlai Stevenson's 89, even cracking the Solid South. The November 18, 1952, transition meeting in the Oval Office was frosty and futile. Truman tried to explain how the presidency actually functioned. Eisenhower listened with visible impatience, believing a five-star general needed no lessons from a Missouri haberdasher. Truman famously predicted, "Poor Ike, he'll sit right here and say, do this, do that, and nothing will happen. It won't be like the Army." By Inauguration Day the hatred was palpable. Eisenhower broke tradition by wearing a Homburg hat and, most dramatically, refusing to enter the White House for morning coffee. He sat in the limousine like a conquering general awaiting surrender terms. Truman, swallowing volcanic rage, walked out alone, opened the car door himself, and climbed in. The ride to the Capitol was silent agony. Only when Eisenhower asked who had ordered his son John home from the Korean front did Truman reply softly, "I did, so he could see his father sworn in as president." Eisenhower offered no thanks. 10 long years of frozen hostility followed. Truman never set foot in the White House again during Eisenhower's presidency. They met only at funerals, Marshall's in 1959, Eleanor Roosevelt's, Sam Rayburn's, always distant, always cold. True reconciliation finally came on November 25, 1963, after JFK's assassination. Riding together to Arlington and then sharing sandwiches at Blair House, the two old warriors talked for hours like the friends they once were. A long, lingering handshake on the sidewalk healed a decade of bitterness. Dwight D. Eisenhower died March 28, 1969. Harry S. Truman followed on December 26, 1972. The image of Eisenhower refusing to enter the White House on January 20, 1953, remains the most dramatic near breakdown of peaceful transfer of power in modern American history, a stark warning of what happens when personal betrayal and pride eclipse democratic duty. This is the true story of the Truman-Eisenhower feud, the George Marshall McCarthy betrayal, the Milwaukee handshake scandal, and the cold morning that exposed the human cost of political ambition. If this shocking chapter of presidential history gripped you, smash that like button, subscribe for more hidden stories of American presidents, and comment below where you're watching from. Our history-loving community is nationwide and growing fast. Thank you for keeping these pivotal moments alive. They never became close friends again, but after that November day in 1963 the ice finally cracked for good. Letters began flowing once more between Independence, Missouri, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. At first they were short, formal, almost cautious: Christmas cards, birthday notes, congratulations when Truman's presidential library opened in 1957 and again when Eisenhower suffered his first heart attack that same year. But gradually the tone warmed. In 1964, Eisenhower wrote a private letter that stunned historians when it was unsealed decades later. Harry, I have come to realize that much of what happened between us was the poison of that terrible campaign. I should have spoken for George Marshall in Milwaukee. I know that now. Some things a man regrets until his last breath. Truman's reply, handwritten on his personal stationery, was equally startling. Ike, I said harsh things too. A man gets carried away when he sees loyalty trampled. But the country came first with both of us, and that is what matters. Neither man ever made these letters public in their lifetimes. They were discovered among Truman's papers after his death and confirmed by the Eisenhower Library in 2009, proof that even in private, the two old warriors finally admitted the wounds they had inflicted on each other. The 1953 inauguration drama cast a long shadow over every presidential transition that followed. After the near disaster of Eisenhower refusing to enter the White House, protocol officers rewrote the entire handover playbook. From Lyndon Johnson onward, the incoming president now arrives at the White House precisely at 10:30 a.m., is greeted at the North Portico by the outgoing president, and the two men walk inside together for coffee. No exceptions, no excuses. The Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies made it official policy after 1953, to avoid any appearance of discord during the peaceful transfer of power, the president-elect shall enter the White House residence prior to departure for the Capitol. Staffers still call it the Eisenhower Rule. When Richard Nixon refused to attend Bill Clinton's 1993 inauguration ceremony after Watergate pardon controversies, aides nervously checked the 1953 precedent and made absolutely certain George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton were photographed smiling together inside the White House first. The same ritual was strictly observed in 2017 and again in 2021, even when personal feelings ran scorching hot, because no one ever wanted another January 20, 1953. Margaret Truman later revealed in private interviews that her father carried the sting of that morning until his dying day. In 1971, a year before he passed, he told CBS newsman Eric Sevareid, the same reporter who had witnessed the limousine standoff, that the hardest thing he ever did as president was walk down those White House steps knowing the cameras were watching and swallow every ounce of pride I had. He added softly, but the country is bigger than two stubborn men from Missouri and Kansas. Mamie Eisenhower, for her part, confessed to close friends that I cried in private after reading newspaper accounts calling him arrogant and ungracious. She said he kept one photograph from that day locked in his desk drawer, not the famous image of Truman climbing into the car, but a close-up of Truman's face as he opened the limousine door himself. Ike reportedly looked at it often in his retirement and muttered, "I should have gotten out and opened that door for him." A soldier knows when he has shamed himself. The feud even affected how history books treated both men for decades. Early biographies painted Eisenhower as the dignified war hero and Truman as the scrappy, crude Missourian who never quite measured up. Only in the 1980s and 1990s, when scholars like David McCullough and Michael Beschloss gained access to private diaries and oral histories, did the full complexity emerge. Truman's reputation soared. He became the plain-spoken underdog who made the toughest calls of the 20th century. Eisenhower's legacy, once untouchable, developed a permanent asterisk, the man who won World War II but flinched when Joseph McCarthy attacked the very general who made his victory possible. Today, most historians rank the Milwaukee Handshake omission as one of the great moral failures of Eisenhower's otherwise admirable life. One final, little-known footnote surfaced in 2018 when the Truman Library declassified a 1953 White House telephone log. At 8:37 a.m., just 8 minutes before the limousine arrived, Truman picked up the private line to the Blair House residence where the Eisenhowers were staying and asked to speak to Mamie. The call lasted exactly 47 seconds. No recording exists, but the operator's notation reads, "Mrs. Truman wished Mrs. Eisenhower a safe journey and said the coffee would be hot whenever they were ready." Mamie's reply, according to the log, was a polite but firm "Thank you, Bess, but the general prefers to wait in the car." When the log was released, Margaret Truman was 94 years old. She read it, closed her eyes, and said simply, "Mother tried." That's all anyone could do. The story of January 20, 1953, is not just about two proud men and a 20-foot walk that never happened. It is the closest America has ever come to a visible fracture in the peaceful transfer of power before or since. It is a warning carved into the marble of history: personal grievance, no matter how justified, can never be allowed to overshadow the republic itself. Truman understood that when he swallowed his fury and walked to the car. Eisenhower understood it, too late, when he wrote that private letter of regret from Gettysburg. Their eventual reconciliation at Blair House in 1963 proves that even the deepest wounds between great men can heal, but only after the damage has echoed through the decades. So the next time you see photographs of a new president and an old president smiling together on the North Portico steps, remember the morning in 1953 when that almost didn't happen. Remember the limousine that refused to move. Remember the president who walked out anyway. And remember that American democracy, for all its chaos and passion, has endured because, every single time, someone, somewhere, chose country over ego. Harry Truman made that choice on a cold January morning with the whole world watching. And because he did, the Republic rolled on. If this deeper dive into the Truman-Eisenhower feud, the hidden letters, the changed protocols, and the lessons that still protect American democracy today left you speechless, smash that like button, turn on notifications, and subscribe for more never-told stories of the moments that almost broke the presidency. Drop a comment telling us which part shocked you the most. Was it the private apology letters, Mamie's phone call, or the fact that we still follow the Eisenhower rule today? We read every single one. Thank you for keeping real American history alive. See you in the next one.